like to show you how to accomplish this color pooling moss stitch or granite stitch with crochet. It took me, I don't know, 10 or 20 tries to get this one going, and even when I did, it's a pretty thick weave, and it wouldn't, I was trying to make a scarf out of it, and I don't think this would end up being a very comfortable scarf because it's so thick and stiff. I may make a handbag or something out of it, but I decided to try it again using a larger hook. This is a size K, and the yarn I'm using is Bernat Softy Chunky in the color Shadow Ombre. So I want to show you it's not as tricky as it seems initially. When you first start trying, you can never get the pattern to start. I'll show you some tricks, and then how you can actually do this with any size hook, with any number of stitches. There's not a magic number no matter what you look up, and even the number, I'm not even going to count the number of stitches that works out for me and tell you, because it doesn't matter. It's all about the level of tension you have while you stitch and keeping that exact tension on every row, and that'll make the squares come out nice and even every time. I had to pick it out a couple of times because my squares started to kind of stretch out or get, you know, either pointier or narrower, and so that told me I'm either stitching too tight or too loose, and I need to match the tension I had earlier on to make it look really consistent. So let me show you. I started again on another ball with my size L hook, and I want to show you that even I don't get it perfect every time. This is what it may look like for you. And what you want to be looking for, it's not every row that's going to be the same color, it's every other row. So I can already tell you this isn't quite working out because I see some green here. The next row doesn't matter, but the third row, the green's way over here, and then the green's way over here. So that's way too steep of an angle for it to look like the Argyle pattern. So I'm going to pick this out, frog, 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 back to the beginning. Alright, so where you want to start is right where a color change happens. First, your yarn needs to be one that changes variegated and the same pattern every time those colors come up. And you need to have a good stretch of color before it changes. At least, you know, a foot or so. And then it changes to gray, then it changes to purple, and then it goes back to green. That's all that this one does, is it goes through those three colors. So you may need to stretch out some of your yarn and find the repeating pattern before you can even start. So then, once you do, tie a knot right where a color change happens, and then just chain. Do lots of chain stitches up until that color change happens again. So what I'm looking for is where blue changes to purple, and I'm really close here. So I'm gonna do another stitch, and I'm gonna stop right there because that's where blue changes to purple. And now I'm gonna go back the other way. I'm gonna count into the fourth chain from the hook. 1, 2, 3, 4. You can see it's a little stretched out there because that's where I already did this. And do a single crochet, then chain 1, skip the next one. It's small because, like I said, I just frogged what I had there before, so I'm restitching what I had before. And that's all there is to it. Single crochet, chain 1, skip the next one. Single crochet, chain 1, skip the next one. So I'll fast forward this till what I'm waiting for is for this pattern to repeat again. I'm going to go back down my chain row until I get to the spot where blue changes to purple. Okay, so I just wasn't paying attention and I went past the point where blue changed to purple. I'll go back, and I'm guessing that last time I turned right here and went on to my next row. but that ended up not quite lining up. You don't want it to be exactly the same length or your pattern will not repeat the way we want it to. We want it just to be slightly shifted for this next row. So I'm not going to turn on purple right here. I'm actually going to do one more stitch, and now I'm going to change directions. So I'm going to do chain 2, turn, and then look closely at this and find where that chain 1 gap is. That's my actual stitch there. It kind of looks like a V. This is where the gap is. So I'm going to single crochet in that big gap, chain 1, and then again you can easily see the V there because it's blue. So the space to do my single crochet is under that big gap. Chain 1, skip the V, go into the big gap, untangle my yarn a little bit here. And I'm just going to keep going like this, single crocheting in between the V's all the way to the other end. And then when I get all the way down here, I'm going to do my last single crochet in that gap from the beginning. So now let's take a look at where we're at. Well, you can't quite tell yet because the very first row, your original chain, is not going to be part of your pattern. So I need to go back one more time before I can see if my pattern's actually forming the way I want it to. Chain 2. Again, find your first V stitch there and then go in just past it. You always want to end your row with a single crochet. Okay, so let's see how we're looking. Let's check my original one again. So the one that worked, this is what we're looking for. So we have rows of stitches that look blue. Going back the other way, they look purple. And then coming back this way, they look blue again. And it almost lines up exactly for several rows. It's just off by one, that color where it switches to gray. Then the next row over, it's one stitch over switches to gray. The next row over, kind of 1.5 stitches over is where it turns to gray. That's exactly what we want, the same pattern changing every other row. If you look at ours here, I do like this tension a lot more. It's much softer, so I am going to keep trying with this hook. But you see we have blue here, and then a row of gray and purple. We should have blue again mirroring right on top. And the problem is the blue already happened over here. So this means we're using too much yarn in between repeated rows. So when I came back here, I added one stitch too many. So let's come back. Frog, frog, frog. If you attempt this project, be ready to frog lots of times until you find your magic number. You're not doing it wrong, that's just part of the process. So, okay, here's my chain 2 where I turned. I'm going to undo the chain 2, my last single crochet. So I'm going to turn one stitch earlier than I had before. I've got chain 1 is the last thing I did here, so I'm going to chain one more time and go back this way. So right now that I'm stitching gray on top of gray, that's just complete coincidence. That doesn't mean that my pattern's working or not yet. Can't tell till we get one more row in. Ooh, but this is looking promising because I've got green 2 rows away from my original green, although that is my original chain, so I'm not gonna count my chickens before they hatch here. Okay, so let's analyze. I think it's still changing a little bit too quickly because we have these greens here. These greens should be right on top, and they're not. So I'm going to go back, pick out one more stitch. Okay, we're back to where I made the first turn. I've got my chain row here, and then this is my first row of the moss stitch. So I'm going to pick out my chain 2, pick out one more stitch, and then I've got a chain 1 there, so I'm going to add another chain to make it my corner, and come back this way. This is looking great because I've got purple right on top of purple. You know, one row apart, with that row of green in between there. This is looking perfect because here purple changed to gray, and now on this row purple's changing to gray one stitch sooner. So this is very optimistic here. I'm going to keep going. Alright, this is looking really good. We've got purples lining up on top of each other, one stitch apart, greens lining up on top of each other, one stitch apart. So I'm going to turn off the camera, stitch for a while, and let you know how this turns out. Alright, so I've done a few more rows, and it doesn't look quite as good as I thought initially. You can still see it's doing the pattern, but it's moving over about 2 rows at once instead of just 1. So I'm going to pick it out all the way down again, take out one more stitch from the first row, and see how that turns out. Alright, I'm back and I finally got it working. This is just about one skein. I've just got a little bit left, and I stopped here because this is a good way to show you when you're at the end of a row, make sure you have enough thread left to do a full color sequence before doing another row. I think I would probably run out if I tried to do this because I've got purple, gray, and in the middle of the green here is where it ends. So I'm going to want to connect my next skein at this exact color change. So I'll pull out the end to where gray turns to green and switch over to the new yarn right here. And that way the pattern will be able to continue into the new skein as long as you care to make your scarf. I want to show you at the beginning of this, I actually was stitching a little bit tighter, and so you can see I kind of have some repeated rows here. It isn't really doing the diamond pattern until about 6 rows in, and then I got my tension even, and I'm going to keep going. You know, if you're really picky, you can pick it out and make sure from the very first row your tension's right, but for me this is good enough, and the rest of the scarf will match here, so there you go. That's how you do the planned pooling. Good luck.